So what we've done in the book is we've done two well-recognized, publicized accidents. Sherry Sanjay from UCLA, and a major fire. Well, it wasn't a major fire, but it ended up being a major event at St. Andrews University in Ireland. And so one focuses on people, the other on property, but they both have very similar outcomes. And so, as you'll see as we progress through this, labs are really not getting safer. Now, maybe specific ones where they've had an incident, they've taken corrective action. But overall, labs are not getting safer. So what we want to do is kind of point out some of the lessons from these two events and just kind of make you more aware of what you can do to help prevent those.
Well, when Chip first approached me about trying to write a book, I said, well, why do you really think this book is needed? And he explained to me what he's just talking about. He said, well, we've had some really horrible tragedies in labs, but when you look around, the same mistakes seem to be happening still. And there's still dangerous laboratory culture going on. People are still getting hurt and killed. And so the book was, because the system is still not working, it's trying to get a little more, people to think a little bit more about what's happening and about the consequences. And that's my part in the book, is more about the consequences. Chip's an expert on how to prevent and what's happening. I know about the liability. So that's kind of what we're doing here today. I'll go ahead and start. Anything else you want to say before I start about legal things? Okay. I'm going to talk about the legal consequences here. Because actually, safety is not just a moral issue. It's actually a liability issue too. And it's something you really have to think about. This way. All right. So the first incident that we talk about in the book, I'm going to just describe. It's a pretty well-known one. On December 29th, 23-year-old Sherry Sanjay was performing a chemical transfer. She was using a substance that ignites spontaneously when it hits air. She was not wearing a lab coat. She had no formal training with the procedure. The syringe that she was using failed. The chemical ignited, and Sherry was engulfed in flames. Her polyester sweater caught on fire. It was awful. She died 18 days later in the hospital from third-degree burns over half of her body. It was a terrible tragedy. It was a highly publicized event. You probably heard about it before, and you would think we would learn a lot of things from that. And this also triggered some very serious legal actions. California OSHA, and that's the next slide here. So we talk about who was liable. California OSHA conducted an investigation after this happened, and they issued citations for UCLA for multiple safety violations, and the university was fined over $31,000. Now, nowadays, it would probably be more than that, but at the time, that was what they were fined for those particular citations that they had with regard to that incident. But in addition to that, and the thing that was really surprising to everyone, is in addition to that, the LA District Attorney filed 4 felony criminal charges against the UCLA Board of Regents and Professor Patrick Heron, who was the professor that was in charge of the research that Sherry was working on. Now, this was significant because criminal charges had never been filed in this kind of situation before. And so it opened everybody's eyes to even greater liabilities that they never thought about. The Board of Regents of UCLA soon were able to settle with the district attorney. They accepted responsibility for the the lab's conditions, and they agreed to establish a scholarship in Sherry's name, and they also agreed to establish an improved safety training program, and that was part of their bargain with the district attorney, and they agreed to drop the charges. So the Board of Regents was out of it. Professor Heron, however, did not settle immediately with the district attorney, and he continued that legal battle for years. And he eventually, in 2014, and this happened in 2008, so it's a long, long battle there with the district attorney. But in 2014, he did finally enter a plea bargain where he agreed to a deferred adjudication type settlement where he did not have any jail time. He was required to make a donation to a burn center and a number of community service obligations also. Sherry's family was not happy with this settlement. They thought that it was really just a slap on the wrist. They really wanted to see a public trial, and they wanted to bring all of the failures that happened in the lab to the public eye, and so they were not really satisfied with that. So that was, and so those were some horrible things that happened with regard to UCLA and what they had to deal with. But what was the true cost there? So in addition to the fines and the laboratory repairs, the settlement terms with the district attorney, it's reported that UCLA, in addition to that, spent nearly $4.5 million in legal costs, defending itself and also Professor Heron. It's a pretty high cost. But that's just the surface. And those are the obvious costs that you would think of. But in addition to that, there are some other costs that are not so obvious. The brand damage to the university's reputation, national media scrutiny, the distrust of the students and the faculty, a distracted leadership as all this was going on. And it cast a permanent shadow on the department. So those are things you don't think about in addition to the money. But there are very serious consequences that need to be thought about. So one of the key points we wanted to point out is that there are many people and many entities that are involved in working in laboratories. And you may not think about this, but there's people like engineers and contractors, administrators, students, professors, suppliers, and on and on and on in the construction and maintenance and operation of a laboratory. So all of those people, when things go wrong, you'll see the fingers will start pointing to each other and all around. And the thing you need to remember is that you don't have to be solely responsible to be held liable. Can be a lot of people that are held liable, so there can be repercussions, even though you don't think that you were that you had much of a part in it. There may be a part for everybody and some liability everywhere. So when we're talking about liability, here are some of the types of liability that you might see in a laboratory accident case. Regulatory violations. Typically, those are going to be imposed by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The key things to know there is that federal OSHA regulations apply only to employees, not to students. The OSH Act covers private employers, not public employers, and that's important because many universities are public entities. So the application of federal OSHA laws maybe, maybe not. However, states are allowed to develop their own OSHA-approved plans, and those plans can have some different provisions in them than the federal act. So, like in UCLA, that case, California has a state-approved OSHA plan, which has some different applicability provisions than the federal act. So, those things are different. So you need to know what applies to your particular entity that you are working with. Workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is an insurance system. And again, it covers only employees. The major issue for universities is often, was this person that was injured an employee? In those situations, for universities, graduate students typically get payments such as stipends and fellowships and grants. And those are payments that are not necessarily wages or salaries. And so there can be controversies, and often are. And I've seen a number of cases where someone is injured, and the question is, well, does workers' comp cover them? Were they actually, can we consider them an employee? And so there's a lot of litigation and argument back and forth about whether it's true or not. And also, workers' comp laws vary from state to state. They're not all the same. So you've got to know what your workers' comp applicability is for your particular state. Lawsuits. Typically, the lawsuits are going to be, in this kind of situation, a tort litigation. What is a tort? A tort is an act or omission that causes harm to persons or property, simply put. There are 4 things you got to prove when you go to court if you're in a tort action to actually, recover damages. And that is that there is a legal duty, that there's a breach of that duty, that an injury occurred, and that the breach is the proximate cause of the injury. So all those things have to be present, and that's what you would present to the judge and jury to try to recover damages. Now, when I started looking at it, and I wasn't alone, because I saw comments from other folks, that there aren't many examples of lawsuits involving laboratory accidents. And I think that's probably because they tend to settle outside of court, and they may also include as part of the settlement a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, as you probably heard them refer to, which prevents anyone from talking about the facts of the settlement or the facts of the case. And so those things are not really readily available to know. And so you don't know what's happened. You don't know how they settled the case. And also, public universities will invariably claim that they have immunity from suit, from sovereign immunity. Those things can work. That varies from state to state also. And so a lot of times the cases they're dismissed, or they're not ever brought because sovereign immunity is there. And the last thing is criminal charges, which we talked about earlier, and it is unusual, but the UCLA case has pointed out that it can and has happened. And criminal charges are not just money damages and having to do extra training and things of that sort. Criminal charges can bring with them incarceration. So that's a whole different level of liability. The bottom line is that consequences can be high in laboratory accidents for everybody that's involved. So preventing these, which is the point of this talk and the book, you got to think about would you rather pay for some fire-resistant PPE or a fume hood validation, some formal SOPs, having some new training programs, hiring and paying for those types, or spend that money on lawsuits and fines and funeral expenses, for that matter, and the reputational damage that, invariably will follow. So prevention is obviously way cheaper and more economical than the cost of any kind of aftermath. There's no doubt about that. The other case that we talk about in the book and that Chit mentioned is the St. Andrews case. This is, in 2019, a fire at St. Andrews University in Scotland displaced 125 researchers. It destroyed the infrastructure that was there. It delayed research for years. The fire started pretty innocently in a base bath in the third floor of the chemistry building. But it very quickly spread to the second floor and the fourth floor. And the fire was one thing, and that destroyed some things, and it was awful. But when they came to fight the fire, of course, they flooded the entire building, making it much more damaged, and it was extensively damaged to the building. Now, nobody was hurt in this incident, fortunately, but the cost of the damages was estimated at about 21 million pounds, and it took over 4 years for them to recover from this. Pretty extreme. Loss of life, that was wonderful that we didn't have any of that, but really there's still a lot of liability there and a lot of damage. So, all in all, from the legal standpoint, what are the takeaways here? Some of the legal lessons that I think we need to observe and just keep in mind, and it is something that makes you really want to be a lot safer. Training must be documented, and in fact, not just training, but everything. Documentation is an effective defense. In a lot of these cases, you see there wasn't any documentation of anything, training or PPE use or anything else. The PPE must be enforced. You can't just talk about it. You have to actually use it. People have to know that it's going to be looked at and it's going to be enforced, that they must follow the rules that are there. The emergency response must be drilled. It should be second nature to anyone working in a lab, that what happens because when you're on fire, you don't think about it unless it's been drilled into you and you go for the shower. So that's a real important thing that I noticed in some of these accidents had not happened. And the other thing is that supervisors and administrators can and will be held accountable. So it's everybody, not just one person, not just one type of entity. You can point the fingers, but the liability could be everywhere. And the bottom line is that this is all preventable.
So we'll continue the conversation. And I think that, to me, I find this to be one of the bigger challenges, is that labs really are not getting safer. And to prove that point, or to illustrate that point, the Chemical Safety Board, which most of you are aware of, they asked this question: after the UCLA incident, did labs get safer? So they took 16 years worth of data, and it's published, it's online. Also, you can contact me and I'll send you a copy if you can't find it. But anyway, they did a report, and they looked at 8 years before UCLA, 8 years after UCLA. In the 8 years before, there were 129 incidences. Now, this is not your common everyday lab accident. These are ones that cause significant property damage or a significant injury. So there were 129 before, 132 after. So you can see the numbers are quite similar. And when you look at the report, it tells you who all the people are and what the outcomes were. And it's kind of the who's who of research universities. It's everybody, and so it's not just small community colleges or people who don't have any resources. These are a lot of the big names. But what's interesting is that in that period, there were 262 incidents. That resulted in 490 serious injuries and 10 deaths. Now, are you aware of who the other 9 are? I mean, the problem with lab accidents is that insurance gets involved, and they know from other types of liability cases, it's cheaper to settle out of court. And so what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to settle this because they really don't want to publicize all the dirty laundry. So they want to settle out of court. And when there's a death, you can count on it costing $10 to $25 million, possibly more, but something in that neighborhood. A serious injury can be multi-million. But the main thing is that they want to get a do not disclose agreement so that everybody involved can't talk about it. So that's why it's such a secretive sort of situation. But what's even more interesting in the statistics and more appalling is that 81% of the accidents were in educational environments. And we have a section in the book about commercial versus educational. But to me, you're in the business to educate. Why are we not doing a better job of educating safety? Why are we not teaching people more about the hazards and all that? So what went wrong in UCLA? In the Sanjay case, it wasn't just one mistake, it was a combination of things. She was using the wrong syringe. She was supposed to be using a glass syringe of double the extraction size. She was using a one smaller plastic one. She was working alone. She was in the holidays, real close to Christmas. She didn't have the right protective clothing. So when her sweater caught on fire, it melted to her, which ultimately led to her death. So she didn't have on any lab coat. But for that procedure, she should have had a fire retardant lab coat. But she had none. And the unfortunate thing was she was less than 6 feet away from the emergency shower. But when she caught on fire, she ran the opposite direction. And so the study showed that she or no one else had ever been trained about where this equipment was located and how to use it. So again, it comes down to somewhat of a training situation. Her training for working with this was from a postdoc who had never read the manufacturer's recommendations on how to handle the chemical. There was no formal SOP. There was no process to verify that she knew what to do. And there were no sign-offs or supervision. So here's a person who's sort of given a job and she's relying on on-the-job training to figure out how to do it. And unfortunately, it had very, very horrible consequences. So when we look at it from a missed opportunity standpoint, UCLA knew that lab coats weren't being consistently worn, but they didn't enforce it. They had had previous instances, not this severe, but they had other accidents and had to deal with those. EH&S had raised concerns, but nobody acted on them. And in fact, EH&S admitted PPE non-compliance was part of the culture and was not something that was being regularly addressed. So why didn't we learn? You know, accidents keep happening. Why? What's going on? And the problem that a lot of people believe is that we treat accidents as isolated events rather than systemic. That we think, oh, well, that's them, that's not us. That's a very isolated event. And we also have it won't happen here. And everything's okay until it isn't. So you've got these cultural beliefs about how it all works. There's a culture of complacency, and you probably heard a lot of this. Well, we've done it 1,000 times. I'm going to show you a video in a minute of somebody that would fall under that category. He's a senior student. He knows what he's doing. We're under pressure to publish. We don't have time for that. So this kind of mindset is something that's going to create, problems. So lessons we didn't learn. SOPs must be written, reviewed, and trained. And the one thing that I see all the time is that there's not enough training. That people, yes, it takes time, but if you don't understand the hazards, I mean, working in a lab is every bit as dangerous as driving a car. Wouldn't most of you agree with that? Now, when you have a child that's getting to be driving age, would you just hand them the keys and say, well, here's the car, go? No. So, I mean, why would we think that you're not gonna have issues, in the lab? So what I'm going to show you now is a real short video. It's an event where professor's doing a demonstration, putting a little bit of sodium in water, and I suspect this person has done it hundreds of times. I mean, so this is something that I'm sure every semester they do it probably multiple times. Fortunately, no one was injured, and you're going to hear the students, when the sound comes back, laughing in the background. They thought it was funny. So there's an event, something simple. It's actually a very common demonstration that gets done in a lot of introductions to chemistry. And the person doing the demonstration probably has done it numerous times and never had this outcome. So just because we practice an unsafe act doesn't guarantee that there's going to be an accident. So you can get away with it for a long time. But, one of my sayings is, hope's not a strategy and luck is not a plan. That, you really have to count on things going wrong. So, it's not really about compliance. A lot of EHS people say, well, we're complying with this, we're complying with that. Well, it's not compliance. It's really about protecting the people. And that's really kind of what we want to do. And so, to me, I think that one of the challenges here is that safety is such a broad term that it doesn't really have the impact as a word that it should. So to me, what we're talking about is laboratory action of prevention. So if we focus, if you were trying to get people to buckle seatbelts in cars when that owl came about years ago, you really are not going to have a lot of luck if you focus on highway safety. It's too broad of a topic to focus on that particular thing. So accident prevention is critical. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you another video, and in this video, it's security footage. So this is a real event. It's in China, and the whole video is 4 minutes, and you're going to see something go from something that was a fairly routine, small accident to a major disaster. And it only took 4 minutes. So this is the lab with 3 hoods in it. I suspect that's a hot plate they're working on. Not sure what the chemical reaction was that caused the ignition there. But now look at what's happening. They don't know what to do. They're talking about it. They're saying, well, this is happening, this is happening. And, they're looking at the situation. The sash is mostly closed. You can see the aluminum foil blowing around, so there's still a lot of oxygen. So if you're familiar with the fire triangle, we've got fuel, oxygen, we got all the bad things happening. So you can see it's still going, and it hasn't stopped yet. So he closes the sash. Now look at him, he's leaning back against the lab bench behind him, and he's looking at it, and he's saying, well, what should I do? What's the appropriate action here? So then he decides, it maybe had something to do with the electrical. I'll unplug it. So he unplugged whatever the device was, which I assume is a hot plate. And again, you can see the air is still going in the hood because the aluminum foil on the work surface is moving around. Now, what you'll notice is you can see the smoke still coming out of the area where it's going on. Is getting denser, and that's all combustible gas, and so that is all in there and building up. So right now the hood chamber is filling up with combustibles. You can see we still have an ignition source, so it keeps flashing. As we watch it here, about another minute, you're going to see that eventually the smoke will start looking orange. So when the flashes go off, the whole hood lights up orange. Now, in a lot of countries, and China is one of them, they tend to do ductwork out of PVC. So this is going to have a plastic duct coming out of the collar. And so you can see it's getting more frequent. We're seeing more density. They're still talking about it. They still don't know what they should do. And I'll give you a little clue what is all that. The watch right out here in this one. There you go. So what's happened is it has burned through the ductwork, and now the fire comes out, and the outcome is they destroyed the lab. The whole lab burned. So it was a major event. Now, a lot of people ask, well, didn't they have a fire extinguisher? Well, we know they did because they used it at the end. Had they got the fire extinguisher in the beginning and brought in there, they could have addressed the issue. But again, they didn't know what to do. So it's an issue in many cases of training. And I think that, you can't assume people know what to do. You have to point out their hazards. You have to point out the risk. You have to say, well, if this happens, you should do this. And you do, unfortunately, need to drill every so often. I find that probably 50% of the people in a lab don't know how to properly use an eye wash. Most people have never really looked at it, but you take an emergency shower, you're supposed to take your clothes off. You know, modesty is not something when you're on fire that you're covered in chemicals. So what happens is, I have a big chemical splash, I get it all over my clothes, so I run over into the emergency shower, and I get it like I would a regular shower. I turn it on, the water comes down, and all it does is dilute the acids or whatever's on me and gets it all over the skin. So it actually is going to cause more damage than had I not done it. Now, fire's a little different animal, but you know, so the whole issue is if I don't know how to use this equipment, you know, how many of you have ever used a fire extinguisher? You know, and so that's like about half of it. So, you know, we all know the concept. We know kind of what you're supposed to do. But if you've never done it, or, and I know, I see one of them, the vendors out there, two of them actually, and they have a really good VR fire extinguisher simulation, so that you don't have to actually use the real thing. But, you know, it's something where that if we don't practice, things are going to happen. So, you know, when things go wrong, who's responsible? So, you know, was it really those people in that Chinese video? Was it the people doing the work? Were they responsible? You know, who was it? And so what's going to happen is that because they did a lot of damage, you know, they may or may not be held accountable. There's the supervision, there's, you know, engineering, maintenance, facilities, EHS. I mean, there's all sorts of people. And when somebody gets seriously hurt or dies, you know, it's like this. And so you may have 15 or 20 people named in a lawsuit. And so it's something that's not productive to doing your scientific work. So anyway, you know, the question that I have is if something like that incident were to happen at your institution, are you prepared to defend what you did or didn't do? Because at the end of the day, and Failing touched on it briefly, regardless of who's responsible, the outcome is going to depend largely on who has the best paper trail. So the paper trail is as important as the aspects of who's really at risk. If you can't prove you did training, then you didn't do it. You know, so if you can't prove you did whatever, then it's basically, you know, it's kind of the end of it. So anyway, we have the book. It's available now, and if you stop by our booth, we have a discount. So we have a significant discount for the introduction. So anyway, with that, we'll go to questions and answers.